Good morning and welcome to episode 12 of Low Down on Low Code. I'm here with my usual co-host, Ryan Duguid. How are you today, Ryan?
Doing really well, thanks, Rob. It's a nice early start to the day while we tune into our European counterparts.
Yeah, not so early for our guest today. So our guest today, we're really excited about this. We have today the CEO and founder of Camunda, a vendor that we've mentioned on quite a number of occasions here on Low Down on Low Code, Jakob Freund. So welcome, Jacob. I'm going to turn things over to Ryan, and we'll kick things off right away.
So, Jacob, great to have you on the show. Been a long-time follower. You're a voice in the industry for what are called process geeks out there, with a real deep focus on big peak process, I would describe it as. And so, as a founder of a vendor in this space that's taken a different path, been around for a long time now, open source, open standards type of background, which differs from a lot of players in the space. Just love to learn a little bit about your journey. And all of us in this process world, we're passionate about efficiency and effectiveness, and love to hear what got you into this and what's kept you so committed to the cause all the way along.
Sure, happy to tell you that, Ryan. And first of all, thanks for having me both, Rob and Ryan. It's great to be here with you today. And the story behind Camunda is basically that my co-founder and I, Bernd and I, we met, 16 years ago maybe, like around 2007, 2008. He was already freelancing with open source workflow software, JBoss, JBPM mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I was working for another BPM vendor. I got into the BPM space doing my studies. I found it just super fascinating. I studied business IT, so I have both an engineering background and a sort of MBA background. And to me, processes were always the algorithms of an organization. So it's like the ability to codify your business is what I found fascinating back then already. So that's how I got into BPM. And Bernd and I started Camunda together as a consulting agency first, focusing on business process management. We wrote this first book about BPMN, like the first one that we published, and later published as Real Life BPMN. We were both from Germany, so that's where we started. And the first 5 years, we just did consulting around BPM, BPMN. And during those 5 years, we worked with lots of different BPM products, like basically the ones that some of us might remember from, like, the Gartner MQ, IBPMS, that sort of thing. And they all had in common that they were not necessarily appreciated, especially by developers. Like, they often found them too heavyweight or a closed suite or not really helpful, even for bringing together business and IT. And that's how we had this idea to publish our own, back then, open source project, Camunda BPM, which was meant to bridge the gap between business and IT based on the BPMN modeling standard, while being very developer friendly and lightweight, etc. That's how it happened, basically.
So obviously when you go down this path, you talk about BPMN, and interestingly enough, I started part of my journey here on the other side of the spectrum, where we would say, oh, BPMN, that's heavy lifting. There's got to be a simpler way than that. And we go with the visual flowchart metaphor. And so there's, in this space, there's a lot of differences. Now, from a marketing perspective, maybe we all sound the same. People use the same words and what have you. But with Camunda, there's quite a focus on what, as I would say, the big P process, right? So there's people talk about process, they talk about automation, they talk about orchestration, there's workflow, one word, there's workspace flow, 2 words, right? Every low code vendor certainly has some flavor of workspace flow to varying degrees. So from your perspective, the focus that I see is on end-to-end process orchestration. You talk about the sort of idea of spanning the people, the technology, and the business processes. So what do you see the sweet spot for Camunda compared with, say, an iPaaS player, because everybody has a connector story, an RPA player, because they'll automate things for you? Mm-hmm. What's different about Camunda, and why does that matter to people?
Yeah, you touched on that already, Ryan. So yes, workflow is sort of everywhere in a way. So if you look at an RPA tool, an iPaaS tool or whatnot, you will most of the time find some sort of flow chart, in the sense of, like, one box after the other, and then maybe there's a branch because it's like an if-then, and that's what they do. But that is really simple workflow patterns, first of all, mm-hmm. as opposed to what we would call advanced workflow patterns. Think, for example, a customer places an order, we process that order, while we're processing the order, the customer calls and cancels the order. And then we have to roll back. Or we have to maybe process the order line items in parallel. Those are advanced workflow patterns that are actually pretty difficult to implement if you have an engine. That's one thing that you won't find most of the times in those products, iPaaS or RPA, and that's because they focus on those local task automation really more than end-to-end process automation. So an RPA product simulates or emulates the user in front of the computer doing stuff on the screen, right, entering data, etc. Like that's a task. That's not really a process. iPaaS focus on the integration flow between systems, like, pull data from here and put data there. But that's also, if you will, an automated task, like moving data from A to B. But you won't find those products at the very core of a banking system or insurance or whatnot to really process the end-to-end flow. So like, customer onboarding or damage claim settlement or things like that. You won't find them there. And that is the difference now with process orchestration. So where an iPaaS and RPA whatnot automate locally, process orchestration sits on top of all of that and stitches it all together. So in that sense, there's even a complementary situation. We have many customers that combine Camunda with RPA products and also with iPaaS products even, because they say, hey, Camunda is the end-to-end orchestrator. But then when there's a step in the process that requires, for example, talking to a legacy system that doesn't have an API, well, then I go via the RPA tool. I trigger the bot does its thing, the bot is done, data comes back, and then, we continue in the end-to-end flow. So it's like it sits on top of the architecture, if you will.
Yeah. So when if we unpack that a little bit, so you talk about the concept of orchestration, I always like to think of the conductor in an orchestra that's overarching everything. How much of the processes you focus on are focused on the human aspect of things? So it's getting people to do things, scheduling work, decisions, and people providing feedback and dynamically adjusting, of course, the process versus that automation side of things. Like, what kind of guidance do you give people as to where to start on that journey? Because I know a lot of people, especially given how simple tools like Zapier have made it, just want to do the automation part. And oftentimes like, well, hang on a minute, just step back and take a broader look at things. What kind of guidance do you give on that front?
Honestly, you need to think from the goal when you conceptualize that. What I mean is you want to provide, for example, the best possible customer experience. So now you need to think about how that process should look like. Ideally, of course, best possible customer experience while being super efficient operationally, which usually means you want to automate as much as possible. But then, of course, there can be situations where you need a human in the loop. You need a human touch. For example, when you have damage claim settlement process, and there might be a fraud attempt. Then you need to have someone looking at the case, if you will. So that's where it all, like, the power of true end-to-end process orchestration is that it gives you the flexibility to have all those possible endpoints, as we say, human systems, even physical devices, in one end-to-end flow. And that means when we look at our customer base, yes, we have use cases that are entirely about human task orchestration. We have use cases that are entirely about API orchestration or microservices orchestration, so like as straight-through processing. We have lots of use cases where it's a mix. And oftentimes, maybe that's interesting also, it is even an intentional mix as part of a modernization journey. So one example maybe is Deutsche Telekom in Germany. In their customer services unit, they have spun up a big RPA practice, like hundreds and thousands of bots. The first step there was to reduce the manual effort, manual tasks in the customer services unit by introducing RPA bots. So eventually they ended up with hundreds, thousands of bots that were integrated, like calling one another in order to implement the end-to-end flow. And that led to what they call spaghetti bot integration. And it really exploded like into their face. Though they had the issue with the brittleness, of course, that we're all aware of with RPA, and the lack of really oversight on the end-to-end flow and all of that. So what they then did is they introduced Camunda as the orchestra. So they basically simplified the bots. They took the intelligence out of the bots and reduced them to really the simple data entry, data read building bricks. They call this easy bots. And now they have a library of easy bots that they orchestrate via Camunda and BPMN in different scenarios. So they're also able to reuse those bots now much better. Okay, that helped them, but they didn't stop there. What they then did is they introduced human in the loop when it came to manual tasks that had to be performed because the bot, for example, failed or whatnot. And they then also started to replace bots with API or microservices-based functions, but one by one, not in a big bang, so that they were able eventually, even like mixing in AI, eventually able to modernize their infrastructure step by step instead of big bang. But it led to an end-to-end process that consists of human tasks, APIs, microservices, AI decisions, or AI-powered decisions, and bots. That's the real power. It's the mix.
Yep. So Jakob, I want to tell a story about a very unnatural act that I ran across in my time as an analyst, and then introduce some data. So I love the story of Deutsche Telekom and how they began to think about orchestration running the bots. The unnatural act is a client that I ran across that had gone full on into bots, full on into RPA. We'll talk about our distaste for that approach in future episodes. It's when it's right. I always say RPA does poorly what nothing else can do it at all. If it is the solution that gets you to an answer, then fabulous, use it. But this particular client had gone in the early days of RPA and gone into one of those programs where the KPI was to roll out 1,000 bots, and quickly realized they need orchestration. They did not go to a vendor like Camunda. They went to a large platform vendor with a very comprehensive platform and used none of the platform except for the modeling and orchestration engine. I said, wow, that's like buying a car so you can listen to the radio. This is just a bad idea. But I want to get to the data. So 8-10 years ago, we've run this survey. Well, now they continue to run it. I ran this survey. It started with Clay Richardson around automation patterns for many years. And I saw this steady decline around interest in things like open source and interest in things like BPMN. And then all of a sudden, about 6 or 7 years, I saw a sharp increase, and then it became a sharp increase. And that coincided with a great deal of interest in Camunda. The qualitative research that backed that up, that said, people are now becoming strategic about that. Suddenly the calls started turning into, I bought XYZ to orchestrate bots, and turned into, I use UiPath or I use Blue Prism. I've got a decisioning engine that's not going anywhere. I've got integrations that go into all kinds of line of business systems. I've got a very, very huge commitment to a content management system. I've got these technologies and they're in place, and I've got technology skills to build around these. I want to take a very strategic approach, but the piece that's really, really hard is orchestration. And I need an orchestration engine. And that was where a lot of these conversations began to come into Camunda. I saw that as people taking a higher level, more strategic approach to automation. And I want to see if the pattern was similar from your viewpoint on the vendor side.
Yeah, it does make sense. I'm just thinking while you were elaborating, I thought about this, and the timeline makes sense because we started pretty much as underdogs in the market 10 years ago with a product, and then about 7-8 years ago we got our first batch of high profile customers in the US, like AT&T and a few other anchor customers there, and that really gave us then certain visibility, and then there was like this snowball effect. And of course, not just like BPMN is a standard, right? As you know, so it's of course not just about Camunda. There's many vendors out there, which is one of the strengths. At the same time, I would say that we were probably one of the most vocal vendors when it came to advocating for the standard. Because to your point, Ryan, many saw it as complicated and didn't like that so much. What people had to realize, and that's what you, I believe, also referring to, Rob, is that BPMN isn't complicated because it's bad. It's powerful, which comes with a certain degree of learning curve because it reflects the complexity of the reality of a business process. And you cannot make that complexity go away. If you, for example, my example where the customer calls in and we have to cancel the order, if we want to simplify that, we remove that ability. So customers cannot cancel orders anymore. Like that's how we can simplify it. But that might not make us the most customer-friendly organization out there. So if we want to and have to accommodate for that, we add complexity to the process. It's inevitable. And the question is if we can tame that complexity and what are our ways to tame it. And that's the real power behind BPMN. And that, Rob, brings us to the more strategic approach where with the RPAs and iPaaS of this world, you can, arguably, I wouldn't, by the way, dismiss that. You can quickly, often low-code fashion, harvest quick wins, like gains, albeit on the local level, on the point solution level. And the more strategic angle is to say, okay, a point solution, a local automation gets me so far but not further, and I need to take the holistic angle, like for one business process end to end, and then eventually actually my whole set of business processes, and not just in the finance department where RPA originated, basically, right? But in my core business, like that's where it really, where we really differentiate ourselves in the market. Where if we want to be the Amazon banking or the Amazon of insurance, if that's like how we think, we have to attack the core business, the mission critical core business processes, and that is a different level, basically.
So, Jakob, there's always an elephant in the corner in these conversations with vendors, and it's what are the implications of AI, right? And there's a couple of different ways to think about this, right? And I think the vendors are really beginning to get some traction, some differentiation in their thinking. Can you give us a little glimpse into maybe two ways that Camunda is thinking about AI? One is obviously there's short-term gains. We're seeing people implement some interesting things. We haven't seen anything that we think is totally transformative. But then there's sort of the long-term vision. Where do you really think this is going, and what does the augment? How does it really augment process automation in the long term? Can you give us a little bit of an insight into the short and long term of Camunda's thinking on AI?
Yeah, totally. And it's like, I mean, you've been in this space for a long time, of course, right? You have lots of experience, like in the BPM space and all of that. As like to maybe less than you, but still like 20 years on my back as well. And it's funny now that we also in the vendor perspective to look at trends as AI. And I'm saying that as a preface because when you look at like how some vendors talk about it, also in their earning calls, etc., they often say, yeah, AI is great because it gives us access to the C-suite. Like we have now AI in our product in some way, and that gives us their attention, like their ears. And that's how they benefit from it mostly right now as vendors, which speaks a bit to the state that we're in right now. Like there's a lot of attention, and there's arguably a lot of value that we can already see, right? This is sometimes astonishing. Would still argue that in the process automation space, to your point, Rob, I haven't yet seen any vendor offering anything truly transformational that is well proven in practice, so to speak. And I wouldn't claim that we have. That's like, I always like to be candid about that and transparent. At the same time, there's a clear vision also on our end. And the way we like to think about it is that AI is like the brain, like it thinks, it can be creative, it can make decisions, but it cannot act. Like a brain cannot act. As a human, I need arms and hands. That is my body. That basically puts, the brain then into interaction to actually have an impact in this world, if you will. And process orchestration in this, like in the stuff that we do in this analogy, is the body. Like we're the arms and hands. We're not honestly, process orchestration itself is pretty dumb. It's not the brain. It executes like a pretty deterministic flowchart and logic. But if we combine those two, like if you combine brains and bodies, then we get humans, and humans have a lot of impact. And that's how we think about combining AI and process orchestration to have an impact on organizations. That is, if you will, the North Star. And that's not super lofty, right? But working backwards from that, we are wondering, okay, how can we harvest that? How can we tap into that potential. And there's basically 3 categories. So we already have features also, but certainly a lot of research going on. One is, and nothing of that is too surprising, I believe. One is, you could say the co-pilot bucket when it comes to, can we help customers to create solutions faster? Like today already you can, prompt in our tool and say, hi, I need like an insurance damage claim form, like give me a car insurance damage claim form, type that in, and then a form pops up. Of course, that form is not, it's astonishing how sophisticated that is already, thanks to OpenAI. That's what's been integrated there. But of course, it's perfect, and then you iterate on that either with further prompts or manually. But it's a time saver, so it makes it more productive. Fair enough. Second bucket is you could say in the broadest sense, like powering the process execution itself. Yeah, when it comes to, for example, any sort of Gen AI powered abilities like writing emails, etc. That's why we have connectors, out of the box connectors to OpenAI, to AWS and Google GCP AI components. Related to that is decision making in the process. So basically, the AI gateway is what we're looking into, right? Can we power that? And the third bucket is, if you will, post execution, but then with a continuous improvement loop. It's about taking all of this huge amounts of data that is produced by an orchestration engine that spans again across, that gives you this holistic view, right? Of a bit like a data lake, but on steroids, because it has the semantics of the process baked in. And we already have this tool like Optimize that gives you heat maps on BPMN and stuff like that, which is nice. But we believe we can take that much further by throwing machine learning on that huge source of data, and use that to drive insights that then can be fed back into process execution. For example, when it comes to cycle time predictions, like, we have this customer request coming in, and because of what we have learned in the past, this request will take much longer to be answered than usual. So let's maybe accelerate that, or let's give the customer a heads up. Like that sort of thing is then where AI can improve the quality of the process execution. Those are the 3 buckets that we're currently working on.
So in terms of, Jakob, when you're obviously sitting as the CEO and founder, carries a lot of weight. I'm sure you have teams of product managers and the likes, but when you're thinking about prioritizing across those 3, right? And you have some contention there, obviously, because to your point, there's obviously, from a company perspective, you want to tell the market there's a strong story, we're moving fast, what have you. I think this is why we're seeing all the co-pilots. I almost, to an extent, I put that in the easy bucket, right? And it's not easy, but it's easier. I always felt the real power in this space came from the last part you're describing there, which is, I look at these hundreds of thousands or millions of processes executing across thousands of customers, running billions of transactions, and there's gold in there that we just can't, the scale of it's so huge. And so it's a perfect machine learning problem. And yet I worry that attention is getting drawn away from that hard problem. If I'm prioritizing quick wins, I'm not going to go to that. I'm going to go to, I'd like a process that blah, blah, blah. How do you think about directing that energy, and how far away do you think we are from that true process intelligence side of things that can give us the insights that can then help us move back up the chain and say, well, can we automate more things or things in a better way? Can we change out some of the orchestration that we've got going on here to reduce those cycle times? Because that's often, the wait times between stages is where a lot of the real pain is, versus the automation of that, to your point, that local task. How do you think about directing resources there?
Yeah, of course you're right. It's a good question, and I like to believe that at Camunda we have a pretty no nonsense, I don't know if that's okay to say, but no BS kind of culture when it comes to how we develop and position the product. What I'm saying here is that we're not building stuff for the sake of having something shiny that looks good on the surface, but then there's nothing really behind it with regards to actual value and reality. That's really a North Star of ours. And there's 2 angles here. One is the customer angle, which is often more short-term focused, like, we have this specific problem, you can help us here. Okay, we pay you for that. And that is a very important angle, right? Learn from the customer, develop with and along the customer is highly important for us as well. So we have, I think, 12 or 13 of the 15 largest banks in the US now are Camunda customers using Camunda for core process automation. And we have a lot to learn from them. I'm saying that because that informs us on priorities. Now, your point, Ryan, however, is valid. The last bucket, this, let's say new process intelligence, a bit of a loaded term now because it's also related to process mining, and there is in fact an overlap, but it's still something else that we're talking about here. Like it can. There's an intersectional element with process mining because it's about data as well. But what we're talking about is when you look at mentioned Goldman, for example, they besides other things use Camunda for their Marcus payment for the Marcus platform, right? The consumer bank account solution, and they use it for payment processing, like processing payments, and like loads of transactions going over the engine. That's why we have this re-architected workflow engine, that kind of use case. So it's like thousands or millions of transactions going over it every day, and that produces an immense amount of data. And that's a huge potential for this, in our vision, autonomous process optimization cycle. Like that's really the big thing.
That's the end state.
That's the big, hairy, audacious goal. Yeah, like, we push a button and the whole thing starts to optimize itself autonomously. And to answer your question, Ryan, I have no idea how far that is out. If you're going to see that next year, I don't know. But like next 3 years, I could imagine that. And then I guess it's always like with, I don't know, the first iPhone, the first self-driving cars, the first generations are often not like exactly the most impressive thing, and then you iterate on it. And then the second, third generation is where it really takes off. But I can't really give you a time span here. But I can tell you that we are putting resources into that because we are driven by, yes, customer requirements, but also our own visions. That's the two things that drive us.
I think there's, you mentioned earlier, you talked about deterministic and non-deterministic. Well, I think one of the biggest challenges here is that process, for the longest time, it's about being deterministic. It's about, there's a reason we have rules engines. Oh, yeah. It's not arbitrary decision engines, right? And so I think that's one of the big challenges here is that if you think about the world of the last thing you want is every time this process runs, it's a little bit different because the model decided,
right? That regulations to observe. Yeah. Exactly. No, I agree with you, Ryan, here. But that might be actually the potential also, because yes, to your point, you're totally right. Business rules, like DMN-based decision tables, etc., just as much as BPMN-based process logic flowchart. That's not ambiguous. That's very much very logic, very very structured, very deterministic, and this idea of the self-optimizing process brings in a level of dynamics, of course, that can get in the way. One way to think about that is, and I'm not saying that this is a silver bullet suddenly, but of course we do have the concept of versioning in also in Camunda, right? So when you edit the model, like every edit is basically saved as a version of the model, and when you deploy it, then it's a version of the model, and then you have the logic of do I continue my startup process and like that sort of thing, or do I migrate them? And I'm imagining that this might be part of the answer when it comes to meeting, for example, these requirements around predictability of process behavior and consistency, right? Not just for consistent customer experiences, but also for, let's say, compliance to regulatory requirements. There could be I think it's going to be, in the best case, not a foul compromise, but a best of both worlds kind of approach.
Well, we do that a little bit today, right? We balance transparency and opacity. In our systems, we figure out where the risk points are, where the compliance requirements are, where the regulatory requirements are. Humans are certainly not always transparent in why they're making decisions, right? But obviously, we have to plan for a world where that same level of transparency is coming from our systems, potentially as well. Not in all use cases, right? So. Hey, listen, I want to, this has been great. We're actually close to time for the first time ever, Ryan. So I think we should give ourselves a gold star. That way to go. Well, there's a quick topic I want to let you talk about, Jakob. First, I want to shout out for your partner, BP3. So I was looking for what I always like to wear, something that's relevant to the conversation, and one of your good partners.
They're awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I've had a chance to work with them, not as deeply as you, but get to know them over the years, and they are awesome. And on the topic of awesome, I got to read a book by your co-founder Bernd and one of your colleagues Leon, called Enterprise Process Orchestration. And I hear the forward is fantastic. Or the book is great, but the forward is fantastic. Jacob, do you want to
It
tee
is.
that for our audience and let them know what's coming down the line here shortly?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for writing the forward, Rob. Really appreciate it. And and yeah, I mean, we touched on these things, right? Process orchestration is not necessarily self-explanatory. So there are people out there that haven't heard of it, or maybe even worse, have heard of it, but it's getting muddy now. We're seeing, of course, also there's like a bit of dynamic in the market with vendors picking up the term. Certainly, both Forrester Gartner have picked up the term. They're pretty vocal about that now, and so vendors jump on the bandwagon, and many now say, hey, we do process orchestration. And it's important to understand what it really is and how it differs from just workflow, as we explained earlier. So there's this technical element about it, but then there's also this element of how to apply it in practice, how to actually scale the adoption of process orchestration in your organization, and how to get to the highest level of what we call process orchestration maturity, where you really have transformed your organization, both on the human and the technical side, to be really, really strong by taming that complexity. And that's what this book is. But it's like a guidance, based on our project experiences. It gives you an idea of, okay, I'm in this complex organization. I need to transform. Enterprise process orchestration is probably part of the answer, not the silver bullet, but part of the answer. What is it? How does it work? What do I need to be aware of? And how can I roll this out in my organization as a, for example, automation center of excellence lead? Like that's the kind of role that he really is at the forefront of that transformation.
Yeah, and I got to say, I really loved it. What really resonated with me, a lot of what this podcast is about, a lot of what kind of drives us to do this is that we think that these projects need to scale far further in order to be transformative. But what really, in my mind, talks about scaling, about bringing this to the DNA of your entire organization, the parts about the COEs and the different forms of the COEs, is fantastic. About really taking a strategic approach to architecture, it is fantastic. So I would highly recommend it to the folks listening. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really enlightening, and I'm sure our audience has. I hope our audience has enjoyed it as much as we have.
Yeah, thank you. I certainly did. It was a great chat. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Catch you next time.
Brilliant.